part 2 of our feeding series with Rob from All About Beardeds.
All right, guys, I got some worms here, and this is something that just becomes a firestorm on Facebook and all the chat rooms, it seems like. But what's the most ideal worm for a bearded dragon? Okay, first I have here is a butterworm. This is very soft, spongy worm. It's a moth larvae, very high in fat, kind of a little bit lower in protein. I would consider this more of a treat. Okay, so if you want to give your animal like a little piece of chocolate, go with a butterworm. Okay. Next worm I'm going to display is a reptiworm, or some people call them phoenix worms. This is a soldier fly larvae. This is probably the most ideal worm for a bearded dragon. It has very soft exoskeleton, real high in calcium and protein, not very fatty, believe it or not. And the way the way they move seems to elicit a feed response. My dragons are fed more crickets, so let's see if we can get some of these guys in here. It's got a kind of wiggle that really elicits a good feed response from the animals. And then we've got the superworm. Okay, now this is probably the most ideal worm for an adult bearded dragon. It's got a relatively skinny exoskeleton, thin I mean. So as far as chitin content, which is the hard stuff on the worm, it's pretty low. And they have a lot of fat. Not really ideal for calcium and protein, but they're real fatty. You can subsidize these worms with powder. And they're pretty much ideal. You have to be a little bit careful with the heads on them, but adult bearded dragons seem to be really proficient at killing them. And I've been feeding these worms for over 10 years, and I've never, ever, ever had a problem. So I really stand behind the superworm. You can also find these in a smaller version, and those are better for the baby dragons. Okay, you don't want to feed an adult superworm to a baby dragon. The last worm we want to show you guys, and this is really the guy that causes all the controversy, is the mealworm. Okay? And it basically looks like a small superworm. This is actually almost an adult mealworm. And the reason these guys just aren't ideal is they have a really thick exoskeleton, so they're real high in chitin and lower in protein, high in fat. And what happens over time, if you feed certain bearded dragons, and I want to point out it's certain bearded dragons. I've had bearded dragons that don't have any issue with it, and then I've had bearded dragons that have really devastating issues with it. What seems to happen is the chitin turns into a waxy substance in the intestinal tract, and it can cause binding and constipation, and definitely would not recommend this as a sole feeder. So this occasionally as a treat is fine, but this should never be a staple for a bearded dragon, in my experience. Okay, now I know there's breeders that say otherwise, but you know, my saying on is that if you can get an alternate food source, get it. So, that's good. All right, that's kind of worms 101.
Good. That's part 2.
I'll show you really quick, once again, so you see the difference. Okay, the superworm is much bigger. It's got some black on it. Much more ideal. All right.
Rob, if they want to learn a little bit more, where should they go?
AllAboutBeardeds.com. You can find us on Facebook. I'm always available to chat. I'm pretty good about it.
Very good.
You know, and experiment, explore, and have fun.
Good.
That's what these are all about.